Support for this podcast comes from Disney Plus, presenting Beatles 64. From producer Martin Scorsese, witness the Beatles' first trip to America through never-before-seen footage and interviews, and see why Rolling Stone calls Beatles 64 a fresh look at how we became the United States of Beatlemania. Deadline raves it's a nostalgic, enlightening must-see. For your Emmy consideration in all categories, including Outstanding Documentary or Nonfiction Special, Beatles 64, now streaming only on Disney Plus. We're going to hear from filmmakers behind 4 Emmy contenders. The titles are Challenge Accepted, Faire, Gone Girls, and The Fall of Diddy. I'm Thom Powers, and this is Pure Nonfiction. Last week, I hosted a live documentary spotlight event with The Ankler in New York City. On this episode, we'll hear 4 of those conversations. The first project is the one you might least expect because it comes from YouTube. It's a participatory documentary, the kind where we follow someone in pursuit of a crazy goal, like Super Size Me. There was a time when cable TV was full of these shows, usually centered around some white guy. Michelle Khare graduated from college 11 years ago when that was the norm. She started producing her own segments for YouTube. She launched a short-form series called Challenge Accepted, where she attempts bold feats like performing Houdini's deadliest trick or training for the NFL Combine. Her YouTube channel has grown to 5 million followers. She may have things to teach an older generation in the media. Last year, she released her first feature-length project called I Trained Like a Black Belt for 90 Days. Is it a gimmick? Well, sure. But it also takes us on a compelling journey. I asked Michelle how she got started.
So just to clarify, Challenge Accepted, I'm actually, before this experience, was not a trained martial artist. And that's kind of the whole thing about Challenge Accepted is that in each episode, I pick a different career, profession, stunt, or lifestyle to really transform my life. For a long period of time, I heard you mention Morgan Spurlock, and definitely very inspired by his participatory journalism and documentaries that he made. And this was really our first feature-length foray. Now, on YouTube itself, our channel makes what most people would consider long-form content, which is in the 30 to 40-minute range, but this piece was 77 minutes. And the idea for Challenge Accepted as a whole kind of came about, as you mentioned, when I graduated. I was a professional cyclist and I also had a day job. So I was living this Hannah Montana lifestyle where I was editing videos and working in traditional Hollywood in some cases. And then at night and on the weekends, I would go somewhere in the world, race all weekend, and then come back and do it all again the next week. And it sort of got to this point where I felt like I could combine these two loves. There's got to be a way. And so Challenge Accepted was born because there are so many amazing shows about talented people or comedians or celebrities trying something for a day. But I really wanted to ask the question, what if you really committed? How far could an amateur go if you get the best coaches in the world and your whole life is surrounding, in this case, Taekwondo for 90 days? What would happen? And it's been a really amazing experience because I actually started this show because I'm a very fearful and anxious person. I guess that kind of makes me look cool. Our editors did an amazing job. But I'm a very anxious person. And so each episode is me tackling a different part of my own fear. And what I didn't expect was that just by doing that and showing that, it could help, in our case, hundreds of millions of people overcome their own fears too. And so what started for me is, this is a fun thing I can do. And it's great to be able to post on YouTube where the only barrier to entry is the upload button. I also am consistently brought back to the work for the mission of the people watching.
And so what did it mean going from, your shorter format, even like from 40 minutes to 77 minutes, like in the sense of storytelling and all that?
So for our production process, we never actually necessarily put a time limit or time expectation on a piece. And we really decide in the edit, what does the story require? And in some cases, that's 15 minutes to tell the story of what it's like to work at a 911 dispatch center and deliver a baby over the phone. And in this case, I'm going to be honest, there's really no faster way to tell the story of going from white belt to black belt than 77 minutes. And you feel that in the piece, that yes, it is 77 minutes, but it moves. And I think that is really a manifestation of the objective we have is how can we tell the most entertaining story possible and the most complete narrative also.
And talk about, well, what are your favorite moments in this show?
My favorite from this piece specifically?
Yeah, from this piece.
So obviously it was very special for me at the end of this journey to get to the black belt test, which you got to see a piece of in the end here. And I'm really, really proud of how that turned out. So this piece had 45 shoot days on it. 45 shoot days where a team was coming to training with me. And then the final test day, I think we had a crew of 30 or 40 people on set, plus all of the students, who were talent watching the test. And so to me, that end of the piece is not only an emotional and exciting win for myself, but also on the production side, a huge accomplishment for our team that we're really proud of. I'm also really excited in this piece that I got to work with Taekwondo legend Master Simon Rhee, who's the star of Best of the Best and has, doubled some of the biggest actors in Hollywood. And I love that about Challenge Accepted because any documentary, you get to fall in love with your subject. And to me, finding those subjects to cover is the most exciting part of the documentary process. And in fact, casting the coaches or the people I'll be working with is oftentimes the most lengthy part of this whole thing. And I'm sure you guys in the audience can relate to when you're choosing a subject to cover. It's kind of like you're choosing a partner in a way. It's like, we're going to be really intimate for a long time and see each other at our highs and our lows. And so it was really special that Master Rhee agreed to do this project. Yeah.
So, you're shaping the narrative of these things, but you're also at the center. The narrative is partly you, your failures, your striving to overcome these big challenges. So along the way, how much are you thinking about that? Like, how much are you thinking like, oh, I failed today? Well, at least it'll be a good plot point. Or do you, you described how in this case you were building up to this, one of your most ambitious shoots ever. Like, are you able to tune out of that and let your crew handle that? Or how do you double dip in these things?
It's a really interesting tension between being producer Michelle versus host Michelle, who has to deal with the problems and obstacles producer Michelle has also come up with. And I think that balance is really important to tell an honest story. And I'll give you an example from this piece. So there was a day when we were training, and it is one of the most, at the time, it was a very embarrassing moment for me. I went to training at 6 a.m. We're in the middle of training, and my period started. And if you can see, you wear white when you do this. And I bled through my dobok, and we were filming. I was like, oh my God, the one day we're filming this week, this happens to me. This hasn't happened to me since middle school. This is crazy. And
call Judy Bloom.
Yeah, oh my God. Could have. But my instructor, Master Rhee, stepped in, and he did something I never expected. And he drove home. He left me at the gym. He drove home and brought me a new uniform. Said, put it on, and we're going right back to training. And
this is it's a scene in the film.
Yes,
it's a moment that you may want to like leave out.
Oh yeah. Let me tell you, we're in the edit room, and I'm like, guys, I don't know about this one. This is so intimate, and there are a lot of like very vulnerable moments throughout Challenge Accepted, which make it special and interesting. And this one, I was like, I don't know about this one, guys. And all of the men on our team pushed and said, you have to include this. You have to. And so I gave in and I said, okay, we're going to include this. And when you look at the data of the film, which we have access to on YouTube, it is the most rewatched scene of the film. It's not the black belt test. It's not me trying to break a brick. It is that scene. And the comments section is flooded with young women saying, this is what I needed to see today. And I think like you have to, when you are in your own work, give in to that producer self for the greater good of the audience, because that is ultimately who we are serving as documentarians.
So you're coming from the future for many of us who, who know about YouTube because our children watch it.
Like in a time machine?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Complete with the outfit.
Oh, thanks.
So, for people who live in a traditional media world for whom the bottom is falling out of their industry, what can you report from the front lines of being a storyteller in this new medium?
I found my way into all of this for exactly the reasons you were talking about at the beginning of this, that I looked at the road ahead for me as someone who looks like me and has the interests that I do, and I didn't see anyone in that lane quite yet. The people I look up to, the Morgan Spurlocks, Steve Irwin, David Blaine, those are all of one category of people, though diverse in interests. And I looked up to them, but I didn't know how I fit into that. And I was honestly kind of like forced into this direction of doing it myself. And it's really been a special privilege, though, to challenge myself to not only make the work and vulnerably put it online, but also to learn how to lead a team, lead a production team, be the CEO of a production company, and manage all of those moving parts. And so I guess I would say from the future, make it, and that the best green light you can give and receive is from yourself.
I mean, I describe it as the future. In some ways, it's also the past of television, because you do these things with brand sponsors. It's like 1950s television. This show is brought to you by Tide. So what is... can you talk a little bit about that relationship? The how you make a decision about what's going to be a right brand to work with, and is there are there decisions made about what you're doing that are influenced by the brands who are sponsoring you?
Well, on YouTube, there are two ways of going about that. There's obviously like when you watch YouTube and an ad just starts playing like mid-roll, kind of like you would see on another streaming platform. We don't really have say over those, but the ones that are baked into the videos, our team is very sensitive and careful about who we work with and want to ensure that the brand improves the content, first of all, and is also aligned in the mission of what we're doing. So, for example, the sponsor of this episode was Dove. And Dove has had a long history of supporting women in sport and young girls' confidence, which is absolutely the mission we were going for here. At the same time, it's important for me as a nonfiction storyteller that the story is always king. And if other people or collaborators are involved, they have to, fall in with that first. So we've been really fortunate to always consistently find those partners to bring our projects to life, and also know when to say no.
So we've got just a minute left. You flew in tonight to be here with us today. Thank you so much. I know you're going to go to JFK now and get on an airplane because you're about to work on your next segment, which is
in just a few weeks, I am going to be recreating Tom Cruise's stunt from Mission Impossible 5, where he's hanging off the side of a military aircraft as it's taking off. So
you've never done that before.
I've never done that before, but if you're in Northern California a couple weeks, just look up in the sky. I might be there.
Well, we can't wait to see that. Thank you for coming and sharing your perspective. Thanks to Michelle Khare. Our next title is Faire, the 3-part HBO series playing on Max. The director, Lance Oppenheim, made his debut in 2020 at the Sundance Film Festival with the documentary Some Kind of Heaven. That was a portrait of the Florida retirement community called The Villages. Last year, he directed the feature Sperm World about the unregulated business of sperm donors. Both those films were striking for their intimate observation and exquisite camera work. Faire shares those qualities, but it's on a larger scale of narrative ambition. It's about an entrepreneur in his 80s known as King George, who created a multi-million-dollar empire from a Renaissance fair in Texas. The series follows George for nearly a year as several rivals lobby to become his successor. On the day of our interview, there was breaking news that we discuss. First, I asked Lance how he found this story.
I first heard about this. I hadn't been to any Renaissance festivals, although I'm from Florida, and there's one in Hollywood, Florida that's very big, so it was inescapable for me as a kid. But I first heard about it because of two journalists, David Govey Herbert and Abigail Rowe. Abigail is here. And they came to me with the idea of there's a man in Texas who has bought a lot of land. He has created the most successful financially Renaissance festival in the entire country. And he is the mayor of a town that he has incorporated. So he has created a real life fiefdom. And he fashions himself as a king. He used to play the king, and he is sort of like a real-life king. People call him King George. And so I was like, if that's real, we should definitely go and look into it and see what's cooking there. And yeah, surely enough, King George, Jeff, Louis, a lot of other people who are part of the documentary, they were kind of engaged in this real life succession battle, for who will be the next person to take over the business.
So I have to acknowledge that there was sad news just today that King George, is passed away. That news broke today. So it's a kind of reminder to us that these films finish, but life goes on, or ends. And I wonder, what you've been thinking about today, and in relation to this passing.
Well, it's both like extremely unsurprising, and it's also extremely.
He was 87 years old.
Yes, and extremely shocking too. And there's a clip, I wish we had shown it, but he talks about the perfect way to go, and he says is to have a woman screw me to death. That's his words. So he's someone who is who never really was afraid of sharing his opinions, even they maybe were sometimes controversial in nature. But he was always sort of looking for an exit plan. And I think when we met him, I think it's only just today, especially, is a big reminder that you make these things. And sometimes you're meeting someone at an inflection point in their lives, and you may not know it. Your presence in their life may have a big influence in where they choose to go. And my relationship with George led to me meeting my wife and having a baby. The producer of the project, Abby, we fell in love making this thing, and there was so much magic that was happening while this project was going on. I feel like fundamentally a different person from when I started it to 3 years after. In 110 days of shooting. And so I think about George a lot. I think about him all the time, and I'm very sad that he's gone, even though he's still somewhere with us.
Well, he's very much present in this 3-part series that you've made. So the other works I mentioned that you kind of started out on. Some Kind of Heaven, Set in the Villages, Sperm World. These were the figures that we were filming were obscure figures. They weren't as big a public personality as George was in his own way. But the Renaissance Fair that he runs has tens of thousands of visitors. He, as the mayor of a town, he is a media conscious person. So feels to me like stepping into this world might have been a different scale than the worlds you've been in the past. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the thing I was always interested in with this story was sort of an examination of power, right? You have someone who has created like a self-contained fantasy world that he is literally the king of, that he's created. So every person that you're looking at, whether it's the general manager or the kettle corn guy or someone who's an elephant trainer, like they're all vassals of George, and they care very much about where his mind is going, because they are hoping that the business will end up in a good place. And so for me, this story was always just like, if we could get to George and we could really examine what was going on there, then I think we could make something really great. But what that required was a really like heavy investigative, kind of active, like journalistic process. And it's funny because you watch this thing and it looks like it looks like Looney Tunes. It's not, it doesn't look like a traditional documentary or anything like that, but it really required a very rigorous, like investigative journalistic enterprise that Abby and Dave, our journalists, were really engaged in. They were like, this thing's happening, you got to go over there. And I would go with my cinematographer, Nate Hertzellers, and I'd bring my editors with me along, Max Ullman and Nick Nazmi. We'd all kind of caravan over and just try and break and shoot these very dramatic kind of double dealings that were going on in very cinematic terms.
Well, people might get from the clip that we saw, but if the more you watch this, I think the more you feel it, that you have a cinematic approach that feels more like fiction than documentary. I mean, these are you've got some very psychologically complex scenes, which is true of all your work. In here, the narrative part of it is a little bit more intense. In your previous works, you've been a one-man crew mostly. Here, you're working with a bigger scale. What did that mean for you?
Well, it's funny to me because, in the beginning days of documentary, you had like Robert Flaherty and you had movies like On the Bowery. You had these great documentaries that really required a lot of the participation of the subjects in them. Like, the camera equipment was really heavy. It's not like it is today, obviously. So it required a lot of, kind of embracing like the artifice of the production to get to a deeper truth. And I've been inspired by that forever, and that's something that I think we were able to really explore with this project. Every person in it, by nature of their profession, is an actor. They're of a Renaissance festival, and I was able to craft with them, both like just these scenes that are very much based in reality. It's their life, but they were able to sort of let me dramatize it with them, or kind of restage certain things. So that thing's happening, you're about to make this phone call that's going to be really important, let's do it over there, It'd be a lot of stuff like that. Oh, I got most of it, I'm going to go over here and do it from another angle, and I'm going to get it again. These things may be considered blasphemous, but I'm always after something that's kind of like a deeper kind of emotional, ecstatic truth, and something that really can capture the headspace of the people that are going through it. I think most of us would say, like, who cares? Maybe this is a succession crisis, a Renaissance festival. I got stuff to do. I got business to take care of in my own life. So my job as the filmmaker is to make you care, and I want to bring you as close as humanly possible to the inner life of the people that are going through this stuff, even if it means bridging some of the narrative tools from fiction filmmaking into the documentary space. Because to me, that I just love people who are obsessed with fantasies and kind of creating fantasies and end up becoming entombed by them. And I think that's also what this is all about, this documentary.
Well, that raises a question about tone. I mean, this is really riding the edge sometimes between, a sympathetic portrait. I mean, you really do get to understand people's motivations in this, but there's a kind of absurdity to the whole sense of a Renaissance fair. And in this scenario of people who are competing against one another to win the favor of this eccentric older man, that's a scenario that is going to show people's best and their worst. So for you, having all that material as you shaped this narrative in the edit room, how did you think about getting that balance between between being sympathetic towards your subjects and and moments where you can kind of have a laugh at them?
Well, to me, I never like to delay it in the filmmaking. It's like there's nothing easier in my mind than to make someone look foolish. And so if that's really what the filmmaking is about, then I've failed miserably. I think what it needs to be, and what each moment that is in this documentary is all about, is really it's coming from a place of understanding. You have someone like George, who acts very erratically. He says things that are pretty bombastic. He's, some people label him as a misogynist or a narcissist or any ist. He's probably one of those things. But one of the things I was interested in is just, why is he this way? What happened to him? Why is he so alone? He's a 86-year-old man when we met him, and he has all these people that work for him, but yet he has no person he can speak to once everyone leaves. He's eating a sandwich and watching an old John Ford movie on TV. And I thought that was really sad, and I think he would agree with that. So I'd come to him, and a lot of it is just about being honest. I'd show people the frames that I would be, lining up. I'd come back in between shoots and show cuts, kind of work in progress of scenes. A lot of it is just very, very, very collaborative, and I find that that's the place, that's the way, I think, to get the best out of people, not just as, allowing them to trust me and me trusting them, but also just to really let them feel like they're having a hand in this thing, which they are. And I don't know. I love I love documentaries. I love fiction movies. I love reality shows. I like stuff like the Vanderpump Rules and Bar Rescue and Kitchen Nightmares. And there's all kinds of those crazy moments and all those things. Except the nature of those productions sometimes can take on maybe a more judgmental approach. So I'm like, how can you port over some of the watchability of shows like that, like Vanderpump Rules, and cross it over with like There Will Be Blood or something, and with something real, and then seeing what happens, And
I mean, given that the story dynamics of this are people who are trying to manipulate a situation, for them to come out on top, did you ever feel in the middle of that as you're crafting a narrative, and it's a narrative that they have an interest in massaging?
Absolutely, yeah. It was difficult to figure out how we could sort of remain both like objective, but then also be so like burrow deeply with each person. I mean, a lot of it really just comes down to time and letting things, knowing when to sort of inject yourself into a situation and knowing when not to. Again, we're shooting most of this stuff with like an Arri Alexa. That's a big camera. You can't hide. You can't be a fly on the wall. There's plenty of amazing fly-on-the-wall documentaries, but I think I'm just so talkative. I don't know how to make them, really. I always fuck things up when I try to just, like, observe stuff. So I think I'm constantly, like, even if I'm not participating in a conversation, people will just be like, what are you doing? Why are you putting the camera there? And so I just try to lean into that and hope to find something on the other side. But, this thing is just so amazingly edited, this whole series, and I had two incredible, I credited them as writers, not because they were like screenwriting. None of these words are written down, it's really just like there are scenes in this that are just like masterfully put together and pieced together by Max Salman and Nick Nazmi. And I think most people in this room, if you've made a documentary, that the editors, you'd be dead in the water without them. They are the screenwriters of the documentary. So I feel so indebted to them and the craft and the time and the work that they put into this thing. And I love those people so much. If you're an editor, please just give yourself a hug and, make sure your director's treating you nicely.
Faire is on Max. You can go watch all 3 hours if you haven't seen it yet. Thanks very much to Lance Oppenheim.
My next guest, Liz Garbus, has been making documentaries for nearly 30 years. She was Oscar-nominated twice for The Farm, Angola, USA, and for What Happened, Miss Simone. 5 years ago, she expanded her career to direct fiction with the feature film Lost Girls. It's based on a true story of a mother seeking answers about her daughter's murder. That opened up a larger story in Long Island, where many sex workers have been murdered over several decades. Lost Girls came out in 2020, when these killings still remained unsolved. 3 years later, there was a major breakthrough and an arrest. Now Liz tells that story in a 3-part documentary series called Gone Girls, The Long Island Serial Killer on Netflix. I asked how she first got drawn into the story.
It was 2015 where I received a script based on a book called Lost Girls, which was the book was the nonfiction investigative book by Bob Kolker, which did a deep dive into 4 of the women who have ultimately been charged, have been connected to the perpetrator who they arrested in 2023, and another woman named Shannon Gilbert, who her disappearance remains unsolved. And so that was a script that was about kind of a collective of families organizing for justice. And it explored the lives these women had lived. Many of them were working on Craigslist at the time. Well, they were all working on Craigslist when they were abducted. But it explored all the aspects of their lives and their family relationships. And it was a beautiful testament to the power of community and organizing, and also an exploration of which victims matter, which victims get attention and which don't. So that was 2015. And as you mentioned, I did get to make Lost Girls with Netflix. And in 2023, when there was an article that a news alert that I got on my phone, just like everybody else, about the arrest, I reached back out to the families who I had been in touch with since the film, on and off. And started a conversation about, was it the time to do something comprehensive, now that there was a very likely suspect, was there a time to do sort of a 360 look at the whole case in documentary form?
What I was thinking about in this is that in a case of criminal justice, there's one narrative that gets told in a courtroom, and lots of times the families of victims, speak about that. They're seeking a form of justice, which is usually a form of justice that plays out in a courtroom. And but the nature of a story that gets told in the courtroom is very circumscribed by the legal process. And when you tell a story in a film, you don't have to abide by the rules of the courtroom. What's admissible or who gets to take the stand in a courtroom? Not every victim's family gets to say their piece or gets to talk about the emotional side of it. It's really just about the legal side of it. And I wonder if you can reflect on what it means for these people who have been on a multi-year journey seeking some form of justice to be able to tell their story in a different way.
I I mean, yeah, and multi-year is pretty much an understatement. I mean, the first victim of the families that I interviewed went missing in 2007, and his charged victims go back to 1993, and he's now charged with 7, but there are major gaps and a lot of questions about how many people he's actually responsible for murdering. I think that there's something very. When I started on this journey of documentary filmmaking, I started in prison. I started behind bars, and I sort of look, and I think as a filmmaker, I'm actually quite defense minded. Like I think about. I mean, that's where I started. And it's sort of interesting to kind of come around to make films in which victims are featured. I think when I was making a film like Angola, we were very much feeling like, victims actually had voices that were listened to by the system. And there was, in fact, another population whose stories were not being heard. And there was a penal system that was discarding them for life. And so was looking at stories. And then what was so interesting about this story is in some ways the narrative was really reversed, because these were families and these were victims whose stories were not being told. And if they were being told, they were being told as she's a prostitute and sort of end of sentence. And that's why she went missing. Well, of course, the story is just like every person in Angola had a complex journey. All of these folks had incredibly complex journeys, just like you do, or I do, or all of you do. So it was a reversal for me, which is interesting. And of course, in storytelling, there's often a lot of space given to the killers now, not the kinds of killers that we met in Angola, but killers like this, actually, who have captivated our imagination, the serial killer. So for me to be able to go, that's a really long, winding road to talk about, to be able to go back and talk to these families and learn about their loved one who went missing feels like the same conversation one is having, visually differently, but in that I had at the beginning of my career. And also, I mean, one thing that, in Lost Girls, of course, we did a lot of research for this, and one of the things that was really interesting was getting to meet women who were working as escorts and sex workers alongside the women who went missing, and really hearing their stories, hearing from them directly, not just from their family members, because family members are often told a certain story about sex work that they're protecting their family members from some of it, but to actually hear from women who had worked alongside them was incredibly revelatory, and I think important too, to kind of, help understand what that was like day to day. I think there are some surprising learnings about that. I mean, of course, it's everybody has their own experience with it, but I think we got to know these women a little bit more.
Now, another layer to the story is some of the failings of the justice system, in this case, the Suffolk County Police Department. It's, many years of mistakes, neglect, bias, corruption, and I'm not saying that lightly. There were actually arrests and convictions made inside the police department. What was it like for you to talk to the law enforcement side of this, who, I have to imagine, might feel defensive in some cases?
And suspicious of me, yeah. It's interesting because when we made Lost Girls, and we were filming on Long Island, very close to where very close to where the women had gone missing, in some cases, like we were scouting like on the actual property. People really didn't like us being there. We actually were like chased off of one of the locations, and we, there was a sense that within the Suffolk County Police Department, that they weren't necessarily so thrilled about us filming around there. There were a lot of, and then you would have some police officers who were, they're responsible for helping keep the crew safe and, sort of for helping us shut down roads, et cetera, who were very friendly and would talk about, about their experience in Suffolk County. And there was a discourse that was prevalent about corruption within the Suffolk County Police Force. There was a lot of speculation. You had these series of women who had gone missing over a long period of time. You had police officers who were known to engage with sex workers, that they will also prosecute and they will also patronize. And so that's pretty ripe for conspiracy theories, right? Like, these women are going missing. Nobody's finding the guys. These cops are having sex with them. They're going missing, and nobody's looking into it. Why? So there were a lot of conspiracy theories. It turns out, so there was an interesting relationship we had making Lost Girls to the Suffolk County Police. Now, it turns out, after Lost Girls was done, there was a FBI takedown within the Suffolk County Police Department, in which, all the way up to the chief of police and the district attorney both went to prison. They did not go to prison for these crimes. I have no reason to believe they had anything to do with these crimes, nor that they wanted to cover up these crimes. What I think is that they were engaged in another criminal enterprise, and they weren't really that interested in this case, and they weren't interested in collaborating with any outside agencies because they were interested in continuing their criminal enterprise. So it's like, the truth is always, there was a grain of suspicion within all of this that was founded, although the corruption was in another bucket. So episode 2, it was incredibly gratifying after all of that speculation and all of the interest we had in the police department, that there was an FBI investigation and that we were able to explore the roots of that corruption going back to the 1970s in that department. And that's what episode 2 of this series is about.
I think it's safe to say that a lot of people in the documentary field right now have a certain kind of wariness about true crime as a subgenre, because it takes up a lot of space in our ecosystem, and simultaneously there doesn't seem to be a lot of space for other kinds of films. I wonder, how you think about that working in this genre.
No, I think a lot about that, and I think what you said is absolutely right. And there's less and less space for the films that I think a lot of us have come up making. I mean, I like to think that, I remember it was like 5 years ago when we made a film with Stacey Abrams, and I had multiple offers. I had a film that I was making about voting rights with Stacey Abrams, and everybody wanted to do it. Now, I wouldn't get that phone call returned. That's really depressing. So true crime is a phrase that I almost get defensive about, and I don't know what that's about. I guess for me there is that through line that I've talked about the stories that I choose to focus on within the space of criminal justice. But I think it's super problematic, the narrowing of buckets in which we are allowed to tell our stories, because there are other ways to tell stories about power relationships in the criminal justice system that don't have anything to do with a serial killer. So that is a problem.
With the minute we have left, I wonder if you can reflect on, the things that came out of Gone Girls being on Netflix that you felt made an impact.
There are two things that I'm happy to share about this. One is in the process of making the film, making the series with Netflix, there was a lot of talk about, people are very accustomed to coming to a piece of true crime programming and thinking there's this TikTok of an investigation. We didn't have that because there wasn't an investigation. What we had were stories of people who were really mad and really angry. And then when we talk about corrupt cops, right? So we didn't have that traditional engine. And so what I'm really, really grateful for is that it worked and that people still watched it. And I think that's good. That's good for the kinds of films that I want to make in this space that are about the stories that deal with power structures. So that's number one. And I think there was something else, but now I can't remember. It was your question was Netflix doing it.
Well,
I mean, maybe that's
was
good enough.
Yeah, I mean, I was asking about like the impact of like watching Gone Girls come out on Netflix and audience reaction.
No, I mean, I think like it's wonder. Netflix is such a big platform, and it's wonderful to see people's reactions and people saying like, oh, they're just like my sister, like people checking their judgments, which is, I think, why we all do what we do, which is for that effect to happen. And so that's just, that it's always gratifying when you see that happen, and that, that people sort of stayed engaged throughout the series.
Well, thank you for the series. It's been a long journey for you, and it was very profound to watch. So thank you to Liz Garbus.
Thank you.
For our final segment, we discuss The Fall of Diddy on ID. The 5-part series investigates multiple accusations against Sean Diddy Combs, who is currently on trial in New York City. The producing team is Maxine Productions, the company known for Quiet on the Set, The Dark Side of Kids TV. I spoke with 3 producers, Mary Robertson, Emma Schwartz, and Yoruba Richen. I asked Mary what pulled them into the story of Diddy.
So I had started this company, Maxine Productions, a few years ago, and part of the reason why I promise I'm getting to an answer to your question, sort of taking the long road. Part of the reason why I wanted to start a company was because I believed that we could apply a really rigorous journalistic approach to questions that course through popular culture, and in doing so, engage a large audience, and at our best, we could move the culture. Before founding the company, I had been part of the team that made Framing Britney Spears, and the response to that film was really electrifying and inspiring. And I said, gosh, maybe I should start a company where we're trying to do more of that, and was lucky to be able to do so. Shortly into the sort of the launch of the company, I partnered with Emma on directing a project, Quiet on Set, for our wonderful partners at ID. And part of what we were doing with Quiet on Set was applying a really rigorous journalistic approach to a question that was coursing through popular culture. What had happened on these sets that Dan Schneider presided over at Nickelodeon. And I will say that question felt important to me because I believe that popular culture is the air that we breathe. It is tantamount to the air that fills our lungs. It therefore, shapes our sense of ourselves. Maybe the air analogy is falling apart there a little bit, but it is something that we inhale and that shapes us. And I also think, and I'll add another, analogy, and it's a mirror. It's a mirror that we hold to ourselves, and it reflects and it shows us who and what we are allowed to be and who and what we want to be, what we aspire to, and what we tolerate. So, that's one of the reasons why I believe it's meaningful to look at popular culture, and that's what we were doing in Quiet on Set. The response to that project was also deeply inspiring, and we started hearing some rumblings, and Emma and Yoruba can tell you more about Diddy. This was well before any indictments, well before any filings, and it seemed to me at the time and to us later that here too was a story that pertained to popular culture, and it merited a really rigorous journalistic investigation. I will also say that timing is a meaningful component in story selection, and we're at a moment where the power dynamics have shifted. They're shifting again in myriad ways, but it has made it possible to tell stories about figures from the 90s and the 2000s who once wielded a great deal of power. Dan Schneider presided over these sets at Nickelodeon. We have many accounts of people who say he was domineering at best, and he's no longer presiding over sets at Nickelodeon. So it's now comfortable for people who once worked for him to come forward and share accounts that had previously been pushed into the margins. And we believe that the same might be true with Diddy. And Emma and Yoruba directed the project, and thanks to their incredibly hard work, we were able to bring forward the accounts of, 30 individuals, many of whom had never shared their accounts on screen before.
So, Emma, can you talk a little bit about those 30 people who were participating? And as I understand it, you were beginning this process before Sean Combs was arrested in 2024, and even before Cassie, singer in his world, filed a kind of key lawsuit against him in 2023. So what was that process like of asking people to talk?
Yeah, that's always a fun process. No, it's good and it's bad. And I think, part of what had happened is we had been in this space talking to people before, the deluge of people were around, and started to build relationships. And over time, more and more people started wanting to talk to us. I will say there was a lot of doors that were also closed. And so a lot of the process is a process of rejection. When you're investigating, you come up against closed doors, you come against tantalizing clues or suggestions that there's a lot more there that you can't always access. But I think, part of it is sort of staying the course, building trust. And, as events started to unfold, events like the raid, or we were filming the day that the video of Cassie in the hotel came out, and we're far, far along in the production by the time he got arrested, more and more people started to sort of see those events and reflect upon their past. And then people would take our call again, or call us back, or talk to a friend who'd already been in touch. And, it's about building those relationships over time, and knowing that, some people are ultimately going to come forward and some aren't, and meeting people where they are at that time.
So, Yoruba, can you talk more about building those relationships? And I mean, a lot of the allegations that you're exploring in this weren't even public when you were starting to dig into them. So, building on what Mary was saying is, there comes a point where people maybe are a little bit more comfortable to talk about them. How are you finding that?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about this. I think this is the first project that I've worked on that events were unfolding over, it was the course of 8 months, but they were unfolding, and it changed, as Emma said, it shifted what this series was going to be, and also who we were able to interview. So not only did people come forward when people also came forward, I think, out of anger and wanting to hold Diddy accountable. So we found that at each of these, processes, and keeping in touch with them, going back to them. Sometimes they would, they would call us, or we would call them, and yeah, it was just that, like, up until our edit ended and up until his arrest, that process kept flowing. I think people felt there were safety in numbers because there was a lot of fear. And I believe that our participants, found the process of holding him accountable, of telling their story that so many had kept hidden for so long, was a process, part of their process of healing as well.
I mean, for people who haven't seen it yet, is there an interview that stood out to you along the way of feeling like a turning point or an aha moment for you?
Well, it was very early on. One of the first interviews that we did was with Faire, who has a very harrowing story of rape by Diddy. And
That's your allegation.
The allegation of rape. And it was, it's hearing these stories is very emotional. It's very heartbreaking. And it made us, I think, understand the sort of depth of trauma that these people who are coming forward were dealing with. And that was very early on in the process.
Yeah, but I'll also say it was actually much later on in the process that we had connected with Kat, who had dated Diddy for a period post Cassie, but then, talks about the night that, she says that she was sexually assaulted by him. And that had happened in, this was the context of why that felt so so much of sort of a turning point for my understanding was that this is after we had all seen the video in the hotel, the video that then Diddy posted saying, you know, this is my lowest point. This is the worst, you know, moment of my life. And the question was always like, was the end that I changed, right? And the question was like, initially, how far back did these allegations go? But then that sort of raised the question of, you know, did he really change, right? And to what extent, you know, has he been grappling with his own demons and in what way? And when you hear this woman's account of, you know, following the sort of aggression that she says she dealt with, it really raised a lot of questions I think we're now seeing play out in the trial of, you know, behavior that continue to the very recent present.
We also had an interview that came in at the very last minute. We were locked on 4 episodes. We had our air date, and one of Diddy's former assistants, Phil Pines, approached us through intermediaries, and he was finally ready to share his accounts. He had accounts that we ultimately incorporated into a 5th episode. So we turned to our partners at ID and we all said, let's do this. And we pulled it together in a manner of weeks. It felt important, though, to bring his account to the story. He speaks in a really, I would say, sober and harrowing manner about being asked to organize events, which he did not call them freak-offs, but you know, in which illegal activity occurred. And he was also allegedly sort of pushed into participating in a sexual act that he wished he hadn't participated in by Diddy. That's his allegation. And he's carried an enormous amount of guilt and other sort of mixed dark emotions with him ever since then. And we had we just saw him out in LA a few weeks ago. We had an FYC event in LA and it was really special. And he was on the stage with us and he said that participating had been his therapy. And it felt great to hear that. It felt great to know that many months, this premiered in January, so many months after the premiere and in the midst of all this coverage around the trial, that his participation was sitting really well with him and that the audience response to his participation was sitting really well with him.
So as this trial is going on now, what are you watching for to come out of this?
Well,
Participants in our film.
Right. Our participants of our film have, one of them's being called to this week, right? We'll see, probably this week. But also details, right? Details that this is the first time we've heard Cassie talk in detail about what happened, her mother on the stand. So for me personally, it's really, hearing the stories, from her, from people around her, filling in holes and adding information that, a lot of which we knew and reported, but now going deeper and getting a deeper understanding of these events and these allegations.
I was just going to say, one thing that we sort of always talked about is, part of the project was to understand his rise, because understanding Diddy's power was part of understanding the power he held over people. And it wasn't looking at sort of the trial of Diddy, right? What we're learning in this trial is in some ways different than what we were telling in the documentary itself. And so, while some of the details overlap, I think all of these stories, the allegations where the prosecution says, he ran a racketeering enterprise, things like kidnapping and arson. I mean, those stories have not been out yet. And that stuff, I think I'm like, okay, what are we going to see?
Do you feel like your portion of telling the story is done, or do you feel like there's more for you to do?
We're very interested in continuing to tell the story. We are, I would say, actively engaged in tracking it, receiving information. I think it's a story that, will continue to have significance in our culture for some time to come. And we don't know how this trial will resolve. And we don't know. And then we don't imagine Diddy is convicted and Trump pardons him. There was, an article in Rolling Stone today by our partner, because we produce this in partnership with Rolling Stone Films, and the reporter Cheyenne, who you see in the trailer and who's throughout the film, there was an article that she published today about reports that members of Diddy's team are actively soliciting a Trump pardon.
Well, we will look forward to more reporting from your team. Fall of Diddy is now out in the world. You can watch all 5 parts. Thanks very much to Yoruba, Emma, and Mary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank all of our guests. We just heard from the team behind The Fall of Diddy, Yoruba Richen, Emma Schwartz, and Mary Robertson, produced for ID. Before that, I spoke to Liz Garbus about Gone Girls, the Long Island serial killer that's on Netflix. We also heard from Lance Oppenheim about Faire playing on Max. And our first guest was Michelle Khare of Challenge Accepted on YouTube. Thanks to the Ankler team of London Sanders and Hannah Hensler, and to our photographers Lou Aguilar and Carlos Sanfer. Thanks to our team, Doc Voices writer Bella Racklin, series producer Hannah Nordenswan, and web designer Cross Strategy. Our theme music is composed by Andre Williams, and our executive producer is Raphaela Nehausen. I'm Thom Powers. Follow us on Instagram and visit our website at purenonfiction.net.